Hello everyone, I hope you're doing well. I'm Shannon and I'm a professional pet portrait and wildlife artist, and I specialise in coloured pencils. And over a year ago now I purchased the Epson ET-8500 printer so that I could start printing my own products from home, whether that be greeting cards, prints, gift tags, whatever else. I just really wanted to start printing in-house because it saves money. I used to use the expensive printing companies online and I'd have to order in smaller quantities and it just got really expensive. So my decision was to purchase a printer so that I could print things from home. And I get a lot of questions about this printer both on YouTube and on Instagram about whether or not it is worth purchasing for an art business. So now that I've had it for over a year and I've done lots and lots of printing with it, I thought it would be great to do a video on my thoughts and feelings about this printer so that you can decide whether it's worth purchasing for yourself. Now, I just want to preface this by saying I am not an expert in printing by any means. It's not something that I'm very knowledgeable on, and I'm very much like a beginner when it comes to printing. So I know the basics, I know enough to do my own products, but besides from that, I am not like super knowledgeable. So if you're the same as me and you don't know a lot about printing, then hopefully this video will make a bit more sense to you, because there's a lot of videos out there that are very technical, and I'm not going to lie to you, I don't really understand a lot of the terminology and stuff that they're talking about. So if you want to hear about this printer from a novice's perspective, then this is the video for you. So without further ado, let's get into my thoughts on the Epson ET-8500 printer 1 year on. So first of all, the Epson ET-8500 is a eco-tank model, which basically means that instead of putting ink cartridges in like you would with a lot of other printers, it's actually got a tank that you refill with ink bottles. And this tank is very high capacity, which means it can hold a lot of ink, which is great if you're printing a lot of things like I am. They do save a lot of money in the long run because the ink bottles are quite inexpensive and ink cartridges can be very, very pricey. So a lot of the time the initial investment on the printer is the smallest part, and then the ink cartridges cost an absolute fortune. But that is not the case with this printer. It's quite inexpensive to begin with, and then the ink bottles are inexpensive to purchase after that. And I've only had to buy a few ink bottles since I purchased this printer, so can confirm that it is really efficient on ink. But a little more about this printer. It is a inkjet printer, which means that it's got little nozzles that spray the ink onto the paper, rather than it using a laser, which is what laser printers use. Obviously, it's in the name. So because it is an inkjet printer, it can produce really high resolution, vibrant, beautiful images. And by not using a laser, it's also a lot more energy efficient. So you're not going to be getting super high electricity bills when using this printer, thankfully, which is another thing to consider when purchasing a printer. So it really is a very budget-friendly option if that is the most important thing to you when looking for a new printer. The particular model that I have, which is the ET-8500 model, prints up to A4, but there is a larger model that prints up to A3, and that is the Epson ET-8550. And I was interested in that one, but because I only have a small studio space, I thought it was more important to try and save space. So I went for the smaller one, and it served me really well for creating A4 prints and greeting cards. If I did want to do anything larger, I would just outsource the prints to a printing company, which isn't the end of the world. So if you've got a smaller space, I would recommend going with the ET-8500 as well. This printer also comes with an A4 scanner, which I will test out in this video, and it scans up to 1200 by 4800 dpi. So we'll go into that a little bit more later. It is good to have a scanner if you want to turn your artwork into a digital file that you can then turn into prints or greeting cards or whatever other merchandise it is that you want to print your artwork onto. This printer also has a variety of different feeds where you can put your paper or cardstock. There's a cassette tray, there's a rear feed, and there's also a manual feed at the back where you can feed thicker cardstock into, which again, we'll get more into detail in that later, but there's a few different options, which is great. It's quite a versatile printer. And another great thing about this printer is that it is wireless as well, so you can connect it with a USB, but you can also use your home Wi-Fi network to connect to the printer, which is what I do, and that means you can also connect to it via your phone as well. But I tend to print more from my laptop. I just find it a lot easier and I can access all of the settings a little bit more easily. So now let's get into the features that I really like about this printer. The first thing that I love about this printer is that the print quality is absolutely beautiful. The images are always really crisp and clear. Once I've played around with the colour settings on my laptop on my editing software and I've colour matched them and made sure that the brightness and all that stuff is good, the print quality that comes out is just lovely. And to say that this is quite an inexpensive printer, I think that the value for money that you get with the quality is amazing. So yeah, that is one thing that really stands out to me with this printer. I use a hammered cardstock for my greeting cards and I use a fine art cotton paper for my fine art prints. It does print really nicely onto like textured papers, and some printers aren't great at all printing onto textured paper or cardstock. So the fact that the quality is really nice on textured paper is very important to me. I also obviously love the fact that this printer helps me to keep my costs very low. I sell a lot of greeting cards on Etsy, and I'm sure you're probably well aware just how expensive the fees are on Etsy. It's ridiculous, but it means that you can get your artwork out there in front of new people because Etsy does all of the hard work for you. But yeah, because of the fees on Etsy, I really like to keep my costs as low as possible when it comes to printing, and the feedback that I get from my Etsy customers is always really positive. They're always saying how nice the quality is of my artwork on the cards. So yeah, I cannot grumble at the quality at all and the cost to run this printer. I have only had to buy like 3 or 4 new ink bottles since I purchased this. Some of the colours go down a lot quicker than others, but that's just the way it is when you're printing in colour. I actually purchased some non-branded inks from the cartridge people in the UK. Now, they very much convinced me that the ink is exactly the same as the Epson one, so I thought I'd try it out and see how I got on with it. So far, I don't feel like I've noticed any difference, and the ink is a little bit cheaper. So whether you want to do that or not, that is up to you. I know Epson would be absolutely adamant that you should only purchase the Epson inks, and I'm sure a lot of people would probably rather do that. Yeah, so far so good on the inks. The Epson ones are really easy to get hold of anyway, so you will not have a problem purchasing the refill inks. And literally all you have to do when you're filling the ink cartridges is flip up the little lid on the cartridge tank and just select the ink that you're filling up and put them in one by one until you filled them all up. It's very, very straightforward. Anybody could do it, I promise. If you've no idea about printers or technology, you will find filling the inks up extremely easy. And this is how many pages that I've printed so far with this printer. So as you can see, I have done a lot of printing, and a lot of those pages I'd say have at least half of the paper filled with imagery. So it's not like there's a lot of white blank space around these images. So yeah, that just reinforces how economical this printer is, and that is definitely one of the main pros about this printer. So now let's test out the scanner that comes with this printer. So this is a drawing that I recently finished, and it's a tutorial that I did on my Patreon of a peacock in coloured pencils. So I'm going to do a little practice with the scanner on the Epson ET-8500, and I'll also do a practice on my Canon Leader 300 scanner, which is the scanner that I've always used to scan my artwork before I even got this printer, and we can compare the quality and see if the one included in the printer is any good. So let's pop that in there. So you can scan to your computer, the cloud, or a device like a USB stick or SD card. But I'm going to scan to a USB stick because I don't have the software set up. So this is the scanner that I usually use, the Canon ET-8500, and already the main difference that I can see is there are a lot more settings that you can choose from on this scanner. So let's have a go using the settings that I usually use and we will compare the difference. Okay, so I've opened both versions of the scan, the one from the Canon ET and the one from the Epson ET-8500, and so far I can see a clear difference between the two. The Canon one is a lot more faded to begin with, but the Epson one is really clear. So I usually edit a lot of different settings on a scan to change the colours and the contrast, brightness and all that sort of stuff. So what we'll do is we will play around with them both, have a go zooming in really close and see if there's any difference. Okay, so I've got the Epson ET-8500 scan and the Canon ET-300 scan up on my editing software, which is Affinity Photo, and I use this for so many things for my business. It's like Adobe Photoshop but so much cheaper because you pay £50 one-off rather than paying hundreds of pounds one-off or £10 a month or whatever it is now. So I use this to edit my scans, and the first thing that I do is just crop it down. So you can see already the difference between the two, but what we're going to do is edit the levels, which is something that I always do. This just makes the artwork a little bit darker. So I always put the original drawing next to the screen and sort of compare the two. And the Epson one is very spot on to the original, which is amazing because the Canon ET, I find I have to edit the levels quite a lot. I just turn down the black level until it looks more accurate, maybe a little bit more. I'm not going to get them absolutely identical, but you can see the difference between the two. I feel like the colours on the Epson one are a bit more green, which is actually a little closer to the original colours. Let's try the brightness. I always like to brighten them up a little bit, add a little bit more contrast. You can play around so much with these different settings to get the perfect edit, but it takes a long time and you do have to do a few test prints to get it spot on, but we're just trying to compare the two at this point. And then you can also play around with the colour balance. So like I said, I feel like it's showing a lot of greens. Maybe we need just a little bit more cyan and a little bit more blue. That looks good. Change the colour balance on the Canon one. That actually needs a little bit more yellow. So the colours do come out a little bit different, but it's nothing crazy. Sometimes I play around with the vibrance as well. So you can turn the vibrance and saturation up to make the colours a little bit more vivid. But overall, I feel like there is not a lot of difference between those two scans. Let's zoom in and have a look more closely. They're very similar. There really isn't that much difference to the quality at all, so I feel like the quality of the Epson ET-8500 scanner is pretty on par with the Canon ET-300 that I've got. I'd have to do a lot more tests to make sure, but I'm pretty confident that if you did want to buy this printer, you would get on absolutely fine with the scanner. You can also scan larger scale work with an A4 scanner. I've got a video on how you can do that. I will link that down below. You just have to do it in sections and stitch it all together on the Affinity Photo editing software using the panorama feature. But yeah, that is a whole other video in itself, and we're just talking about the printer today. As far as the scanner goes, I would definitely recommend it. I think it is really nice quality. So moving on to the things that I don't necessarily love as much about this printer. Now, while the print quality is stunning, unfortunately the prints that you create using this printer cannot be classed as giclée prints. Now, you might have heard of giclée prints before if you are an artist, or you might not have done. Giclée prints are basically the highest quality prints that you can make, and that is because they're made using pigment-based inks. Now, a lot of the inks in this printer are pigment based, but some of them are dye based inks, so you can't technically call the prints that you make using this printer giclée prints. And a lot of the time giclée prints are printed in limited edition batches, which basically means there's a limited amount of prints created using that artwork, whether that's 200 prints, 150 prints, even just 50, and each print is numbered to show which one in the print run it is. Now, giclée prints are the ones that you see in art galleries. They've got that museum archival quality to them, so they're pretty much guaranteed to last like 100 years or whatever it is. That's the way a lot of fine artists like to work. They like to create giclée prints in limited editions that they can then put into galleries. Sadly, the prints that you make using this printer can't be guaranteed to last that long. They're not technically archival, so that is one thing that's a real shame about this printer, because I have been into art galleries and shown them my prints, and they basically said to me, because they're not giclée prints, they can't put them in the gallery. Now, not creating giclée prints isn't the end of the world. I've been able to sell prints on my online shop, on my Etsy shop, and at craft fairs, and they've sold absolutely fine. It just means that you have to price them a little bit lower. They're a little more commercial rather than being very luxurious and exclusive like giclée prints that you'll see in galleries are. So if you're planning to sell on Etsy or at craft fairs, you can absolutely print your prints using this printer and you'll be fine. But if you want to start getting into galleries and pricing yourself a little bit more higher end in the luxury market, then this probably isn't the printer for you. And because this printer does use some dye-based inks, if they get a little bit wet, they are more prone to smudging. So you do need to be extra careful when you're handling the prints that you make using this printer. I have managed to spill a bit of water on them before and it's completely ruined the print. Okay, so the next con of this printer, which is something that really frustrated me for the longest time, is the fact that you can get little roller marks on the paper. Now, this happens more so when you use a really thick cardstock. So I think the maximum this printer recommends is 300 GSM, and I was using 300 GSM card for my greeting cards for a long time, and they always had roller marks on them. Now, this didn't stop me selling them online. I've never had a complaint about it from my Etsy customers, so it's obviously not too obvious to a customer, but as an artist who's a perfectionist and sees every little imperfection and picks up on everything, it really bothered me. Since changing my cardstock to a slightly thinner card, they've become a lot less obvious, so you can still see them a little bit, which is so annoying, but they're not obvious at all, and you can see it more on the inside of the card than the outside. Now, Epson themselves would say it's because you're not using Epson on brand cardstocks or papers, but I do use an Epson cotton textured natural fine art paper for my prints, and you can just about see them on that as well. They are visible. It doesn't ruin the print. I have some prints on my wall and I cannot see them now that they're on the wall, but if you was literally looking at it really close right in front of you and you were trying to spot it, you would be able to see it. So yeah, that's a bit frustrating, to be honest, and one of the worst things about this printer. Now, you can prevent this from happening altogether by using the manual feed slot that I mentioned earlier. So this is basically a hidden slot on the back of the printer. You have to lift up the casing and then have a fiddle around and get it all set up. One thing that I did find though when I started practicing using the manual slot was that it stops printing borderless. So you can only print borderless if you use the rear feed, and the manual one for some reason doesn't allow you to print borderless. So when you're making greeting cards like I am, where the design goes right to the edge of the card, you can't do it. So that is incredibly frustrating. Sometimes it feels like there's no perfect way to do anything with printing. So for that reason, I don't use the manual slot at the back. And it's also really faffy to get into. If you've got your printer on a shelf like I have and it's just facing forward, you'd have to turn the printer around completely every time you want to print using that manual slot. So not practical. You'd have to have it set up sideways or on a surface where you can access all angles of the printer, and for most people that's just not convenient. Yeah, that really does wind me up a little bit, to be honest, that there's no way to print without the roller marks and with the borderless printing. And I also found that it would print a little bit wonky as well when I used the manual feed. I don't know if that was something that I was doing wrong, but yeah, it's just something that seemed to happen a lot of the time when I tried using that. Yeah, even that isn't a solution really, but you can print really thick cardstocks in that manual feed. It's just whether you need it to be borderless or not. So obviously the printer does struggle a little bit with thicker cardstocks, which is why it's getting the roller marks, and because of that sometimes the cardstock that I used to use, which was the Tintoretto Gesso 300 GSM card for my greeting cards, it would get jammed so often and I'd have to constantly take the paper out, put it back in and just keep going until it eventually printed. And that seemed to happen more and more the more that I used the printer. So whether that's like because it's getting more use, I don't know what that is, but yeah, it doesn't like anything that's too thick. The cardstock that I've got now is, I want to say it's 250 GSM, it might even be 300, but because it feels a little bit thinner it doesn't struggle with that. So if you're using a thicker cardstock as well, you can only really put one piece of card into the rear feed. Any more than that and it won't be able to handle it, it'll get jammed. So yeah, one at a time, but with the new one I can put like 5 to 10 at a time and it's fine. So I'm enjoying it a lot more since finding this new cardstock. I will link it down below if you're interested. I get it from Envelopes UK, so I don't know where you could get it from in different countries. I'm sure you'll be able to find some sort of hammered card that you can use. That's if you even want a textured card. You can print really nicely on smooth like photo glossy paper using this printer as well. Another thing that I find quite frustrating about this printer is how long it takes to print one sheet. So because it prints at such high quality, it does feed the paper through really slowly because it's getting every single little detail on your design. In a way, I understand that it takes a long time because it is such high quality, but it just feels sometimes like it's printing one sheet for like 10 minutes, which obviously isn't the case. I'll do a little timer and see how long it actually takes to do one sheet for my greeting cards. If you are bulk printing because you've got a big order in, you want to sell 50 cards in one go, then I think you will find it very frustrating trying to print all that with this printer. I don't think it's technically a commercial printer, it's more of a personal home printer, although a lot of people use it for businesses like me. Because it is more intended for personal use, it isn't the fastest of printers, and I think if you wanted to print a lot of sheets in one go, you're better off with a more commercial printer that is designed to be really fast but also really high quality, or you'd have to purchase like a few of these printers and have them all going at once. But then I feel like that also defeats the purpose of it being really cost effective because then you're having to buy more than one printer. But yeah, it's very slow and it takes a long time to print a sheet of paper. So it's not the end of the world if you're new to all of this and you're just starting out your art business and time isn't a huge deal. You just want to get stuff out there and start printing. But if you're a established business and you're growing and you're wanting to do a lot more printing, I would consider looking for something else. So no printer is without its limitations, and I think for the price point this is a really good entry point printer for artists or anyone who wants to create printed goods for their business. It's great for selling on Etsy, on your own online shop, at craft fairs, but I wouldn't recommend it if you want to start getting into galleries and doing more high-end luxurious prints. It served me very well over the past year and it will continue serving me very well well in 2025, and eventually I might look for a fine art G-clay printer, but for now I'm happy with this one and it's keeping me going, running my little art business and printing from home. So whether this printer is worth it or not is totally down to you and the goals that you have for your art business and whereabouts you are in your journey. I hope you found this video helpful and you can now make an informed decision. I'll leave a link to the printer down below so you can go and check it out. Let me know in the comments below if you've got any questions or if you have this printer and you have any recommendations on how to fix some of the cons that I have in this video, then let me know. But I really hope you enjoyed this video. Please give it a like if you did and you found it helpful, because it really does help my channel out. Subscribe to see more videos like this and I'll see you in the next one. So bye for now.